In 1937, a farmer in western Kansas buried $40 in a coffee can beneath his barn floor and told only his oldest son. That can saved the family twice. Once during a drought, once during a funeral. He never explained why he did it. He did not have to. Number 16 on this list kept more American families out of debt than any bank ever did. Number 5 was so sacred that breaking it could get a man quietly shunned by an entire county. And number 1 is the rule that held everything else together. These 25 rules were never written down. No book, no classroom. They passed from hand to hand, kitchen to kitchen, in silence. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count them down. Number 25. Never let the gas tank fall below half. Your grandfather did not think of the top half of the tank as fuel. He thought of it as insurance. In rural America in the 1940s and 1950s, the nearest hospital might be 40 miles away. The nearest filling station closed at 6, and a winter storm did not send a warning first. A man who let his tank run low was a man gambling with his family's ability to leave, so he filled up at half. Every time, without discussion. Gasoline cost about 27 cents a gallon in 1949, and topping off a tank from the halfway mark ran maybe $1.50. Cheap insurance. When a neighbor's wife went into labor at 2 in the morning, when the creek rose, when word came that somebody's father was dying 3 counties over, the car was ready. Nobody praised him for it. Nobody noticed at all. That was the point. The rule only became visible on the one night it saved someone, and by then he had already followed it 10,000 times. Number 24, keep cash hidden in the house. The generation that watched banks fail in 1930 and 1931 never fully trusted them again. More than 9,000 American banks collapsed during the Depression, and millions of families lost everything they had deposited, down to the last dollar. So your grandmother kept a fold of bills somewhere no stranger would ever look. Inside a hollowed-out Bible, taped under a dresser drawer, rolled into an old sock at the bottom of the flour bin. Usually $20 to $50, which in 1950 could cover a month of groceries or a doctor's visit. This was not paranoia. It was memory. The hidden money had rules of its own. You did not touch it for wants, only for needs. You replaced it the moment you used it, and you told exactly one other person where it was in case something happened to you. Families who followed this rule sailed through strikes, layoffs, and bank holidays that broke their neighbors. The coffee can was the original emergency fund, invented decades before financial advisors started charging money to recommend one. Number 23. Fix it the day you notice it. There was a saying that never made it into any book. A loose board today is a broken leg tomorrow. Your grandfather walked his property the way a ship captain walks a deck. A hinge that squeaked got oiled that afternoon. A fence post that wobbled got reset that weekend. A small drip under the sink got a new washer, 6 cents at the hardware store, before it became a rotted cabinet floor that cost $30 to replace. The rule was not about neatness. It was about arithmetic. Small problems compound like debt, and the man who deferred maintenance was borrowing trouble at brutal interest. Insurance was thin, credit was thinner, and a major repair could wipe out a season's savings. So the repair happened immediately, while it was still small enough to cost almost nothing. Modern homeowners call a contractor when the ceiling finally comes down. Their grandfathers would have caught it 8 months earlier, standing in the hallway, looking up at a water stain the size of a quarter. Number 22, never discuss money outside the family. Nobody outside the household knew what your grandparents earned, what they owed, or what they had saved. Not the neighbors, not the church, not even the extended cousins. This silence worked in both directions. If times were good, talking about it invited envy, borrowing requests, and resentment that could poison a small town for a generation. If times were bad, talking about it invited pity, and pity was considered more corrosive than poverty itself. A family could be eating beans 6 nights a week and the town would never know because the children were sent to school clean, patched, and instructed to say nothing. Oral histories from the Depression are full of adults discovering 50 years later that their childhood best friends had been just as broke as they were. Everyone was performing stability for everyone else, and somehow the performance itself held communities together. The rule sounds like secrecy. It was actually dignity, enforced quietly, one closed mouth at a time. Number 21. When it is on sale, buy two. Your grandmother did not shop for the week. She shopped for the winter. When canned tomatoes dropped to 10 cents, she did not buy one can. She bought a case. When flour went on sale, the 50-pound bag came home. The pantry, the cellar, the chest freezer, after 1955 or so, these were not storage spaces. They were a buffer between the family and everything that could go wrong. A layoff, a blizzard, a strike at the plant, a price spike. Families who kept 3 months of staples on hand could absorb a crisis that would send a modern household straight to a credit card. The math was simple, and she did it in her head at the shelf. Buying ahead at the low price was a guaranteed return, better than any interest a bank paid. Economists now call this hedging. She called it stocking up. The full pantry was never mentioned and never shown off. It just sat there in the dark, quietly making the family unbreakable. Number 20. Know your neighbors by name, need, and skill. Your grandfather could tell you which neighbor had a welding rig, which one had a truck with a winch, which widow needed her walk shoveled, and which family was too proud to ask for help but would accept a basket left on the porch. This was not friendliness, it was infrastructure. Before credit cards, before insurance covered much of anything, before government safety nets reached rural America, the neighborhood was the safety net. A barn raising was a construction loan paid in labor. A shared harvest crew was disaster insurance. The man who knew his neighbors could survive almost anything. The man who kept to himself was one broken axle away from ruin. The rule had a hard edge, too. You banked favors before you needed them. You showed up at other people's emergencies so that people would show up at yours. Number 19. Eat before you go. It sounds like nothing. It was everything. Before any trip to town, any day of field work, any long drive, your grandmother put food in front of you and you ate it, hungry or not. The reasoning ran 3 layers deep. First, a fed person makes better decisions, and errands cost money when your judgment is soft. Second, buying food away from home was considered a small financial wound. A sandwich at a lunch counter cost 35 cents that the kitchen could have covered for a nickel. Third and deepest, you never knew when the next meal would actually come. Cars broke down, weather turned, work ran long. The generation that had known real hunger treated every departure from the house as a small expedition, and no expedition left with an empty stomach. Watch an old farmer even today. He eats before the drive every time, and he could not tell you why. His mother installed the rule 60 years ago, and it never came loose. First pattern break. Here is what makes these rules different from advice. Advice gets written down, argued about, and sold in books. These rules were transmitted another way entirely, through repetition and example, until they stopped being ideas and became reflexes. A boy watched his father check the gas gauge 1,000 times. A girl watched her mother slide 2 extra cans into the basket 1,000 times. Nobody explained, nobody lectured. The rules moved from one generation into the muscle memory of the next, invisible as breathing. That is why they were never written down. You do not write down how to blink, and that is also why they are disappearing. The chain of demonstration broke somewhere around 1980, when convenience made the rules look unnecessary. They were not unnecessary, they were just waiting. Number 18, keep your shoes where you can find them in the dark. Every member of the household knew exactly where their shoes, coat, and flashlight were, and could lay hands on them in total darkness in under 30 seconds. House fires were the great terror of the era, and for good reason. Wood stoves, kerosene lamps, cloth wiring, and balloon frame construction meant a farmhouse could go from first smoke to total loss in under 15 minutes. Fire departments were volunteer, distant, or non-existent. So the family rehearsed without ever calling it rehearsal. Shoes lined up by the bed, toes pointing out. Coat on the same hook every night. The rule extended past fire. A calving cow, a knock on the door at midnight. A storm cellar run when the sky turned green in tornado country. The prepared exit was a quiet discipline that cost nothing and occasionally meant the difference between a family that lost a house and a family that lost more than a house. Children absorbed it before they could read. Number 17. Save the jar, the button, the nail, the string. Open any drawer in your grandmother's kitchen and you found the archive. Rubber bands looped on a doorknob, a tin of buttons cut from shirts too worn to mend, bent nails waiting to be hammered straight, jars washed and stacked in the cellar, ready for next summer's canning, a ball of string wound from 100 package wrappings. To modern eyes, it looks like clutter, maybe even like a disorder. It was actually a system. Every saved object was a purchase the family would never have to make. A new canning jar cost a dime. A saved one cost nothing. Multiply that across 1,000 small objects and a decade, and the drawer full of junk was quietly worth a month's wages. The rule had a boundary, too, one that hoarders never learned. You saved what had a job waiting for it. When the object no longer had a plausible future use, it went to someone who could use it, because waste and clutter were both considered failures. Number 16. If you cannot pay cash, you cannot afford it. Here is the rule that kept more families out of debt than any bank, any advisor, any government program ever did. Your grandfather bought his truck used with bills counted out on the hood. Your grandmother saved for the washing machine in an envelope marked in pencil, and the machine arrived only when the envelope was full. Credit existed, the installment plan was everywhere by the 1950s, but the old generation regarded it the way they regarded ice on a pond in March. Maybe it holds, probably it does not. Debt meant that a stranger owned a piece of your future, and the future was exactly the thing they had learned never to promise away. There was one exception, land, and even then, the mortgage was attacked like an enemy, paid down with every spare dollar until the deed came home. Families who lived by this rule wrote out recessions in houses that were theirs. The neighbors who financed everything discovered, every decade or so, exactly whose name was really on their lives. Number 15. Someone always knows where you are. Before you left the house, you said where you were going and when you would be back, not as a courtesy, as a protocol, going to the back 40 to fix fence, home by noon, driving to Harmon's for feed back by 4. If the hour passed and you had not returned, someone came looking, and they knew exactly where to look. In a world without cell phones, this simple verbal telegraph saved uncounted lives. A tractor rolls in a far field. A man goes through river ice. A car slides into a ditch on a road nobody travels in January. The difference between rescue and obituary was usually one sentence spoken at the kitchen door on the way out. The rule bound the family into a living tracking system, and it cost nothing but the habit of saying it out loud. Number 14. Plant more than you need. The garden was never sized to the family. It was sized to the family plus the bad year plus the neighbor who would need help. Your grandparents put in twice the tomatoes, twice the beans, twice the potatoes that the household could eat fresh because the surplus was the plan. It went into jars, into the root cellar, into crocks of kraut, and onto the porches of people who were having a harder season than they would ever admit. A packet of seeds cost a nickel. The labor was free because the labor was the family. What came out of a quarter-acre garden in a good year could feed a household of 6 from October to April, But the deeper logic was about margin. A garden sized exactly to your needs fails exactly when you need it, because drought and blight do not negotiate. Planting extra was how you told the future you were not afraid of it. The overflow rows were the tithe, the insurance, and the diplomacy, all growing in the same dirt. Number 13. Learn to do it yourself before you pay someone. When something broke, the first question was never who do we call. It was how does this work? Your grandfather rewired lamps, patched roofs, ground valves, half-soled shoes, and butchered his own hogs, not because he loved every one of those jobs, but because each skill learned was a bill deleted forever. A plumber's visit cost $5 in 1952, nearly a day's wages for many men. The washer that fixed the leak cost 6 cents. That ratio, learned once, reorganized a man's entire relationship with his house. There was a boundary, and he knew it. Some jobs, a cracked chimney, a well gone bad, went to the man who did them for a living, and he was paid promptly and respected. But the default was competence. The library, the neighbor, the repair manual from Sears, these were the university. What that generation called being handy was actually a quiet doctrine. Your hands are the cheapest labor you will ever hire, so train them. Number 12. Fill the woodpile in August. Nothing separated the old generation from the new like their relationship with lead time. Firewood for January was cut, split, and stacked in the heat of August, seasoned and waiting months before the first frost. Coal was ordered in September when the price was low, not in December when the whole county wanted it at once. Storm windows went up on the first warm Saturday of fall. The rule underneath all of it: prepare for a season during the season before it, when preparation is cheap and calm, never during the crisis when it is expensive and desperate. A cord of seasoned wood bought in summer cost $8. The same cord, in a February cold snap, if you could find one, cost double and burned worse. Your grandparents watched neighbors learn this the hard way and quietly resolved never to be that neighbor. The full woodpile in September was not pride. It was a wall between the family and the coldest week of the year, built while the sun was still warm. Number 11. Do not tell people what you have. The gun stayed unmentioned. The savings stayed unmentioned. The good tools, the full cellar, the land that was finally paid off, all of it stayed unmentioned. This was the shadow side of never discussing money, and it had teeth. In hard times, visible plenty made you a target, for thieves in the worst case, for endless borrowing in the common case, and for the slow, social poison of envy in every case. During the Depression, families with food learned to draw the curtains at supper, not out of shame, but out of tact and self-protection at once. Your grandfather's rule for possessions was the same as his rule for opinions. Have good ones, keep most of them to yourself. The flashy man, the one who showed off the new car and talked about his deals, was regarded with a specific quiet suspicion because everyone had watched that kind of man go under before and take borrowed money down with him. Security lived in silence. It still does. Second pattern break. Now notice something about the first half of this list. Almost every rule so far is about margin. Extra gas, extra cash, extra food, extra wood, extra rows in the garden, extra time before winter. Our grandparents were not pessimists. They were engineers of slack. They had lived through 1932 and 1943. And they had learned the single lesson that modern life has spent 70 years unlearning. The system does not owe you a normal day tomorrow. Every rule built a small buffer, and the buffers stacked until the family was surrounded by shock absorbers it never talked about. Today we call this resilience and hold conferences about it. They called it nothing at all. The remaining rules are different. They are not about things. They are about people, and they cut deeper. Number 10, trust the feeling before you trust the explanation. If your grandmother got a bad feeling about a man, the man was never left alone with the children, and no argument on earth could change it. She could not tell you why. She did not need to. That generation treated instinct as data, a signal assembled from 1,000 small observations too fast for words, and they had learned in hard places that the feeling was usually right and always cheap to honor. The rule ran the other way too. A stranger who felt right might be fed at the table within an hour of arriving. But the door of full trust opened slowly, over years, over witnessed behavior, over how a man treated animals and waitresses and his own word. Modern psychology has spent decades confirming what she practiced. That intuition about people is pattern recognition, not superstition. She never read the studies. She just watched, decided, and did not explain herself. Being thought rude for a moment was a small price. The alternative could cost something that could never be repaid. Number 9, always have a skill in your hands. A job could be taken from you. A farm could be lost. A bank could close. But nobody could repossess what your hands knew how to do. So every child was pushed toward a trade, the way modern children are pushed toward college. The boy learned carpentry, or engine work, or welding. The girl learned sewing, canning, nursing skills, bookkeeping, not necessarily as a career, as a floor, the level below which the family could never fall. During the Depression, the men who kept eating were rarely the men with titles. They were the men who could fix things, because things break in every economy, up or down. A barber, a mechanic, a woman who could alter clothes. These people traded skill for groceries straight through the worst decade in American history. Your grandfather said it in 6 words, if he said it at all. They can't take it out of your hands. It was the only wealth he fully believed in. Number 8, clean up tonight no matter how tired you are. The dishes were done before bed. The kitchen was set for morning. The tools were wiped and hung before the shop light went off. Every night, without exception, without discussion. On the surface, this looks like tidiness. Underneath, it was a survival discipline with 2 blades. The first was practical. Morning was the productive time, and a morning that began with last night's mess was a morning already half lost. Breakfast at 5, in the field or on the shift by 6, demanded a kitchen that was ready the moment the light came on. The second blade was psychological, and the old generation understood it without vocabulary. Order was morale. A family under real pressure, short on money, short on luck, could still control its own kitchen table, and that nightly act of control held despair at arm's length. You finish the day. You do not carry it into tomorrow. Ask anyone who grew up in one of those houses. The counters were bare and wiped every single night, straight through the hardest years of their lives. Number 7, never spend it down to 0, whatever the amount was. Wages, savings, the flour in the bin, the hay in the loft. You never used the last of it. There was always a reserve behind the reserve, a line the family simply did not cross. If the envelope held $12, the family behaved as if it held 8. If the cellar held 40 jars, 20 were spoken for and untouchable until spring. 0 was not a number to that generation. 0 was a cliff, and they had watched families go over it. And they knew the fall did not stop at 0. It kept going, into debt, into dependence, into decisions made from panic instead of judgment. The last dollar was never really a dollar. It was the ability to buy gas for an emergency, medicine for a fever, a bus ticket to where the work was. Modern finance calls this a liquidity floor. Your grandmother called it not being foolish, and she enforced it with nothing but her own refusal every week for 50 years. Number 6, show up. When a neighbor's barn burned, you were there in the morning with tools. When someone died, you were on the porch with food before the family even knew they were hungry. When a man was sick at harvest, his fields got cut by people who never sent a bill. Nobody organized this. Nobody had to. Showing up was the tax. Everyone paid into a system that no government ran, and the payments were remembered with perfect accuracy for decades. The rule was silent, but the accounting was real. A family that showed up for others could be struck by lightning, literally, and the county would rebuild them. A family that never came, that stayed home behind its curtains, discovered in its own crisis exactly what it had purchased with all those quiet absences. Your grandparents did not attend funerals for the dead. They attended them for the living and for the day, guaranteed to come when the living would be them. Number 5, feed whoever is at your table. Here is the rule so sacred that breaking it could get a family quietly shunned. Anyone under your roof at mealtime ate. The hired man, the stranded traveler, the tramp at the back door during the Depression, the neighbor kid who just happened to appear at 5:30. The pot always stretched, another cup of water in the soup, another handful of cornmeal in the bread, and no one was ever asked whether they were staying. They were simply handed a plate. Hobos in the 1930s marked the fences of generous houses, and families knew about the marks and fed people anyway, because that generation understood something modern abundance has let us forget. Hunger was not a distant concept. It was a memory with a face, sometimes their own. Refusing food to a hungry person was not thrift. It was a kind of blasphemy. The rule cost pennies a year and bought the family its soul. Third pattern break. Have you noticed what is missing from this entire list? Not one of these rules requires money. Not one requires equipment, education, or luck. A broke family could follow all 25 tomorrow morning. That is not an accident. These rules were forged by people who had nothing, for people who had nothing, which is exactly why they work. Everything on this list is a behavior, and behaviors compound the way interest does. Follow one rule, and nothing visible happens. Follow all of them for 30 years, and you become the family that everything bounces off of. The last 4 rules are the deepest ones, the load-bearing walls the others hang on. Number 4, take care of the tool, and the tool takes care of you. The axe was wiped and oiled after use. The saw was hung, never left on the ground. The truck got its oil changed on schedule written in pencil inside the glove box, and it ran for 22 years. Your grandfather's tools outlived him, and some of them are in your garage right now, still working, 80 years old. The rule was economics first. A quality hammer cost $2 in 1948 and maintained it never needed replacing, so the $2 was the last hammer money the family ever spent. But it was also a philosophy that leaked into everything. A man who maintained his tools maintained his truck, his house, his body, and his marriage the same way, with small, regular attention instead of dramatic rescue. Neglect in that worldview was not laziness. It was a character flaw with a price tag. Number 3, your word is the contract. Deals were closed with a handshake, and the handshake held for decades because a man's word was tracked by the entire community with the precision of a credit bureau. Break it once, and everyone knew by Sunday. Break it twice, and you would be paying cash up front for the rest of your life because no one would extend you an hour of trust. This was not naive. It was the opposite. In a small economy, reputation was collateral, more binding than paper, because paper needs a lawyer, and reputation enforces itself. Your grandfather made promises slowly and rarely for exactly this reason. Children were trained in this before anything else. You said you would, so you will. Tired did not matter. Raining did not matter. The word had already gone out ahead of you, and you had to catch up to it. Number 2, rest one day, no matter what. This is the rule that looks like religion and functioned like engineering. One day in 7, the work stopped. The fields waited. The shop stayed dark. The family sat at one table and did nothing productive at all. In houses that went to church and houses that did not, the day of rest held, because the old generation had learned that a human being is also a tool, and a tool that is never maintained fails at the worst possible moment. They had watched men work 7 days a week and break, in body or in temper or in judgment, and they had noticed that the resting family somehow got more done by December than the grinding ones. The day off was not laziness sanctified. It was the maintenance schedule for the people, and it had a hidden function no one named. It was the one day the family actually saw each other, every week, guaranteed for an entire childhood. Ask anyone over 80 what they remember. It is Sundays. Number 1, never depend on only one of anything. Here is the rule, holding all the others up. One income was never enough, so there was the job in the garden and the eggs sold at the gate, and the sewing taken in. One heat source was never enough, so there was the furnace and the wood stove and the quilt stacked 3 deep. One plan was never enough, so there was the crop and the hogs, the savings in the coffee can, the skill and the second skill. Your grandparents assumed that anything they depended on could vanish overnight, because for them things had. The bank in 1931, the rain in 1935, the jobs in 1938, so they wove their lives like rope, many strands, so that no single snap could drop them. Look back over this whole list, and you will see it everywhere. The second source, the reserve, the backup that never got mentioned. Modern life is astonishingly efficient and astonishingly single-stranded. One employer, one grid, one supply chain, 1 week of groceries. Our grandparents would look at that arrangement, say absolutely nothing, and quietly go start a garden. Here is my challenge. Pick one rule and run it for 30 days. Fill the tank at half. Do the dishes every night. Say where you are going every time you leave. Just one. Then come back and tell me if I am wrong, because I started keeping cash in the house 2 years ago, and it has already saved me twice. Drop the rule you are taking in the comments. I want to see whether the half-tank rule beats the coffee can. And if your grandparents had a silent rule I missed, write it down here, because they never did, and somebody has to. These were not habits. They were a quiet system for staying alive, and it still works.